Yeah, so hi Anna. You obtained a position at ETH Zurich about 1 year, actually more than 1 year ago, right? And you moved to Zurich 1 year ago. So
In
how has
September,
your,
yeah. So it's been 9 months, yeah.
I see, and how has life in Zurich been so far?
It's been great. Yeah, I mean, it's been a bit unusual moving during the pandemic, and I still feel like I haven't had the full experience of living in Zurich. And with home office and everything, it hasn't been quite the full experience. But all the same, it's been really exciting being in a new place. And Zurich is great, and ETH is great. It's been lovely working with students, and even though it's all been mostly online interaction, it's been exciting to form a group here.
And have there been like any obstacles that you had to overcome in adjusting to this new environment and also new country? For example, language barriers or so?
Well, I would say, sure, my husband and I are learning German. This is kind of an ongoing process, but it hasn't been a barrier for work and so on. Just maybe, yeah, not even for getting around and so on. I think I've just been very impressed at how many languages people in Switzerland generally speak. So that's been really interesting. In terms of obstacles, I don't know. I think just getting a group started at the beginning I think the pandemic has been probably kind of the biggest obstacle that I think in-person interaction is really important for getting kind of an energy in the group. So I think having everything remote does make it harder, but I'm looking forward to that changing soon. And I think all the same, we've been kind of working well all together. So, and it's actually still been very collaborative, which is great. So I'm part of the systems group at ETH, which is a group of several faculty, and there's weekly seminars where students get to interact and we get to see what everyone is working on. And I'm also co-advising students, and this has been a great way of still having collaboration and interaction within the group, even if things are online at the moment.
Okay, that sounds great. And can you also shortly introduce yourself? Like, what is the path that led you to obtain this position?
Sure. So hi, everyone. I did my undergrad in the University of Toronto in engineering science. So the engineering science is a program where you kind of do a general engineering degree the first 2 years that's very focused on math and physics. And in the last 2 years, you specialize, although the specialization I picked is electrical and computer engineering, which is still quite broad. And I was, and still am today, really interested in computer architecture. I went to Stanford University for my PhD. And here I kind of moved gradually from computer architecture more and more up the stack to computer systems, so operating systems in particular. And I am particularly interested in cloud computing and how this is kind of changing the way we use computer systems today. So I'm particularly interested in kind of large scale data centers and how to make the software and hardware in these large scale facilities that run services like search and video streaming, social media, and all these large applications that we use on a daily basis, how to make these run efficiently. So my PhD at Stanford was with Professor Christos Kozirakis, and I focused on storage systems in particular for the cloud. And after my PhD, I spent a bit over a year at Google Brain as a research scientist. And this was really interesting, looking at computer systems, but in an environment surrounded by machine learning researchers and systems researchers. So I was looking at kind of what are the particular new challenges that machine learning workloads impose on computer systems, and how can we improve the system stack to support them. And yeah, in September 2020, I started the position at ETH Zurich as an assistant professor. So this has been really great so far.
I see. And your stay at Google Brain, was this something like a pre-medical or was this something that you decided after accepting your new position or before?
So I applied in parallel to industry and academic positions. I was interested in both, and my field of research is very applied. So the research kind of does naturally fit in both environments. And so I did apply to both, and was able to kind of get a bit of best of both worlds and continue to collaborate with Google also here. But yeah, kind of arranged to spend 1 year at Google and defer the ETH offer for the following year.
Yeah, great. So I would say let's chat a bit about the academic system in Switzerland. So how would you characterize it roughly?
Sure. So I'm still also learning a lot about it through teaching and so on. But yeah, there's two main academic semesters, the fall and the winter semesters. So the academic year is from September to June. What's a bit different from the US and Canadian systems that I'm used to is the examinations that are often worth 100% of the grade and kind of happen at a month or two after the semester has finished. So that's a bit of a different cycle from what I'm used to from a teaching perspective. But for the graduate courses, there also tends to, depending on the course, there tend to be project components and things like that as well. In terms of kind of the research side, one of the, I think, really great things that is true in Switzerland is the amount of funding and support that professors get. So this has been great and really helps you get your group running, that you have funding for students and positions right from the beginning. And this is kind of, you continue to be supported throughout. Of course, you're also applying to grants to get to support an even larger group and so on. But this is really great.
So these are this kind of base positions that professors permanently get to fund some PhD students, right?
Exactly.
I see.
Right.
And how does the rank system work? Like, I guess ETH and universities in Switzerland, do they adopt the tenure track system?
So I can't speak for all universities in Switzerland, but for ETH and for EPFL, yes, I know as well, they do have a tenure track system. And so it's after 5 years, you have an evaluation for your tenure. Well, you have also kind of medium points as well for the evaluations where you get feedback.
You already mentioned that you're part of the systems group here at ETH. So how does this organizational unit like fit into the landscape? Because you're also leading your own lab, right? So what's the role of the systems group for you and groups at ETH in general?
Right. Yeah, no, I think this is super important for me. It's a great advantage of being at ETH is being part of the system group. So I think, yes, every professor has their own group of students, and they might have group meetings with just their students. But I think it's also really important for the students, also for me, to kind of get a wider perspective on what others are working on that is still quite closely related usually. And so I think it's just an opportunity to kind of broaden the horizons of everyone. So there's kind of weekly seminars where we hear presentations from students or faculty within the group. There's also typically a 1 year or a yearly industry retreat. And so here we typically go to the mountains for a few days with the whole group in terms of students and faculty, as well as collaborators in industry. And here it's some fun activities, but also just presenting and poster sessions, just opportunities to interact. And I think in particular, this interaction amongst people in the group, but also with the industry members is very, very valuable. And that's something that I also had the opportunity to participate in at Stanford. And I really liked that model of having these retreats where you got to meet and interact with industry members, but also other colleagues and students in the groups.
This sounds awesome. I also very much like this kind of retreats.
And also now, we're kind of, all the students are, the systems group, we're all kind of sitting in the same space, and students from different professors are kind of mingled in terms of where they sit in this open floor seating type of thing. So I think it really is designed to foster collaborations, which I think is really important and great.
You already said you joined about 9 months ago. So what were the initial challenges that you faced? I mean, of course, the pandemic, but also in general, like bootstrapping teaching, finding your first students, start working on funding. So how did you approach all of this?
Sure, yeah, there's a lot kind of happening at once. So I think actually having deferred the offer for a year and kind of knowing that I was about to start did help in some ways. For example, I was able to start recruiting students, and this was very helpful. So actually my first PhD student started at the same time that I did in September. So this was, that was great that I had the opportunity to kind of interview students and start looking for group members early on. With regards to teaching, one thing that I really appreciate at ETH also is that co-teaching is quite common, and I think this is a great model, and is especially helpful when you're starting out and as assistant professor, that you can co-teach a course with a senior professor. So, for example, I co-taught an undergraduate course called Systems Programming and Computer Architecture with Timothy Roscoe. So this was a great experience. And this past semester, I co-taught a graduate level cloud computing course with Gustavo Alonso. So both of these were very valuable. I mean, every university will have sort of, some different formats of how they, just different norms for various aspects of teaching. And it's super helpful to have someone that you're teamed up with to go through this with, especially in the beginning. And you also learn a lot just from seeing how other people teach the material and kind of designing exams and things together. So I think this is, if you have the opportunity to do that, especially early on, I think that's a great way to get into teaching at a new institution that you just joined.
Yeah, that sounds very useful. Great. So I would say that we can slowly start chatting about the interviewing process and decision process and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So can you perhaps give us a short overview of how these processes look like for you?
Yeah, so I applied to kind of R1 research institutions and some industry positions as well at industry research labs, or in some cases, they not necessarily a separate research lab, but a company that does have kind of a research, not necessarily a research division, but a cutting edge research that they're doing as part of the company itself. So the interview process, I'll talk maybe specifically about the academic one. For industry, in some ways it was similar, but perhaps not as long of an interview typically. So the application for the academic positions, so typically around November or December, the application material was due, which included a research statement. So this is around 3, maybe 4 pages describing a summary of what you have done, but also an important component is, what is your future vision for research? What do you plan to do in the next few years? So this was, this was really useful and kind of a good exercise to really sit down and think, when you're doing your PhD, you're very focused, going in depth into a particular topic, and you're thinking about what's the next paper, what's the next kind of natural chapter to this. And so it's kind of a nice change to sit back, kind of zoom out and think, what are the next themes and topics, not just what are the next papers and experiments. So this was a great experience. And for this, I found it really helpful also to look at examples and talk to peers, come up with drafts of this statement and share it with others and get feedback. Because the one thing to keep in mind here also is that the people reading these statements aren't necessarily in your fields. They'll be in the department, but not necessarily in your area. So in my case, computer systems, for example. And so it's really important to emphasize the impact of what you're doing. There's also a teaching statement, and some universities also asked for a diversity statement. You submit a list of your publications, so your CV and so on. And then you also need 3 to 5, and maybe in some cases they allow up to 6 references. So this is another thing to keep in mind if you're planning to apply for faculty positions, that you will need several reference letter writers. And so, this particularly comes naturally if you've done a lot of collaborations. If you've worked kind of mostly just with your own advisor, then it's not necessarily as clear who else you should ask for reference letters. But this is fine. I mean, even if that is your case, that you haven't closely collaborated with other faculty, it's a good idea to kind of, as you're preparing to apply, several months in advance, sit down with some faculty that you think could be reference letter writers, and have a conversation with them about what you've worked on, what you plan to do, and they can kind of have a discussion with you and let you know if they're willing to write the letter. But that's something that's good to do several months in advance.
Makes sense. And Because you mentioned you can, for example, have 3 letter writers or also 6. So is more always better here?
Yeah, you don't always have a choice. It's sort of dependent on the university, but sometimes they do kind of leave it up to you. I don't think that more is always better. I think it depends. I think it's good you want kind of letter writers who know your work, ideally also know you and can speak about it. I mean, there's kind of this, yeah, and if they're well known in the field, then this also adds more weight to the reference. On the other hand, if they are kind of more distant from you because you haven't worked together or they're not as familiar with your work, then you know, these are kind of the things that you need to balance. And yeah, I mean, also not all the letter writers, I guess, have to be from academia. You could also, if you had close industry collaborations and from industry research, I think this can also be a helpful kind of other lens to the type of work that you do. So these are other things to consider, but I wouldn't focus on just maximizing the number of references. Instead, I would kind of think about this balance and try to see how you could get kind of a nice complete picture of yourself painted from the different perspectives these reference letter writers could provide.
Makes sense. And in this preparation phase, you typically at some point also start with your job talk. So what kind of structure did you use and what would you suggest there?
Sure, yeah. So, right, so when you're invited for an interview, the main kind of component is a job talk along with a lot of one-on-one conversations and sometimes also a group interview. But of all these things, I think the job talk is sort of the main thing that you can really prepare for. These one-on-one conversations, it's hard to anticipate what you'll get asked. You can kind of practice a bit this environment, but I think the job talk is a really important component of the interview and one that you can really prepare for. So for this, I think it's again good to remember that who your audience is. So your audience is members of the whole department that you applied to, and I think it's important to show. It's important that everyone in the audience understands the key idea and the impact of your work, and then for the people closest to your area to also understand the depth and value of the technical contributions as well. So you can kind of maybe think of your talk structure as kind of like a T shape where you have the breadth, you make sure everyone's on the same page for the general ideas. You try to explain things in kind of an easy to grasp manner, but also making sure the real impact of your work is clear. And then you also need a part of the talk where you really go in depth and show why this was not trivial, what are the real technical challenges, and then kind of bring it back again with why this matters and where you're planning to go with this. So most of the talk, I think, still does focus on work that you've done, but I think it's good to include, and most jobs talks will include also at least a bit about some future work directions that you're planning. And also if you've, in addition to highlighting publications and so on, if you've had kind of impact, if your open source software, for example, has been used by a company or, it has been getting traction in various ways, all of these things are also forms of impact that are really good to mention.
And when applying for institutions, so what were your criteria? You already mentioned that it was, I guess, primarily R1 institutions, then research positions in industry. Did you have any kind of, for example, geographical considerations, or how did you basically decide whether to apply or not, besides what you already mentioned?
Yeah, so I got the advice that, you should only apply to places that you really think you would accept an offer from. So if you thought, and in my case for academic institutions, because I was sort of, I am interested in both academia and industry, one kind of advice I got was ask yourself the question, if this was your only academic offer, would you accept it? And if you don't think the answer is yes, then there is no point to, wasting your time or other people's time. But definitely, sometimes you're not sure, and you think it'll be a good fit, and you kind of also learn a lot through the interview process. So I think it's this question of how many places to apply to and how to decide that is a bit tricky, but I think, yeah, rule of thumb is it should be somewhere that you're genuinely excited about, and you believe if you got the offer, you would be happy to accept. And sorry, I forgot, your question was, oh, what criteria for applying? Yeah, so for me, it was really important. I mean, who I would get to work with at this institution in terms of students or faculty colleagues, or in industry, the other researchers. So this to me was really important. And this, like, on the academic side, this question of like where, what kind of students you would get to work with, in some way actually is a bit correlated to the ranking of the university, because this does kind of influence where students choose to accept offers from. So it's not the most important thing, and it's not the perfect correlation, but it is, I guess, one of the factors to think about. But yeah, also just, I think it's really important who you'll get to collaborate with, and yeah, what kind of funding opportunities you'll have. For me, it was also important wherever I went, what kind of industry collaborations I could continue to have, even from academia. So for example, at ETH, I was really happy to hear that the systems group has these industry retreats that sort of really resembled this environment that I was used to at Stanford and Silicon Valley, for example. So of course, it's not, it's not quite the same as having the Silicon Valley right there, but it's nice that there's a lot of interactions with industry, and that ETH values this. So that was, for example, another important factor for me. And of course, there's also personal factors and geographical constraints. For example, I do prefer to be in a city. And so this was another thing that it does make sense to think about right off the bat, because if eventually, when you have to make a decision between offers you have, these factors do come into play, and so it's good to consider them from the beginning when you're deciding where to apply.
Right. Yeah, that's great advice. And I would say let's chat a bit about the interviewing process itself, starting with how was your visit at ETH structured?
Sure. Yeah, I can talk about ETH, and most of the faculty interviews were similar actually in the general structure. So there's the job talk, which we talked about. So this is typically a 1 hour slot where you're expected to talk for maybe 45 minutes, maybe 50 minutes, and leave some time for questions. So I think it's good to prepare a talk that's 40 to 45 minutes, and with the intro at the beginning and questions along the way, and at the end, this time quickly gets filled up. And then there's a series of one-on-one interviews, and these can range from being half an hour to up to an hour each, and they're typically back to back. So it's a quite a packed schedule at a lot of universities. Also, it'll start with breakfast, lunch, and you'll end with dinner, and you'll have kind of one-on-ones in between. So it's really packed. It's usually 2 full days or a day and a half. But it's actually it is draining at the end of a day. You're really engaged, and you're kind of low on energy by the end of the day, but it's super exhilarating and really, really, really enlightening, really enjoyable to actually get to meet so many people, hear about their work, also hear about what questions they ask about your work, because they're all coming from different perspectives. So I think, I don't know, my advice for that would actually just be to kind of enjoy the ride and enjoy the special opportunity you get to interact with so many people across the department and different institutions. But yeah, so in terms of structure, there's the job talk, there's the one-on-ones, which are sometimes typically in the faculty's offices. So you're kind of walking from one office to another. And some of these one-on-ones also are actually for meals, it'll typically be more with a group of faculty, and it'll be a bit more casual, but I mean, you should still treat this as definitely part of the interview. And then one thing that ETH had, which I didn't have in my other interviews, is a group interview with a committee. And here I had an opportunity to present very briefly about my teaching experience and interests, as well as a bit more about future work ideas. And then it was mostly a Q&A. So I think, again, this was a 1 hour slot in total. And so it was a Q&A with around 10 to 15 members of the hiring committee. And I mean, actually, this format made a lot of sense to me, that sort of everyone got to hear the answers to the same questions that I gave. Like, so it actually didn't. Yeah, I mean, I thought that was also a nice experience and a good way to meet quite a few people, hear different questions, but have it sort of in this group environment as opposed to only having one-on-ones. But that's not something that I saw in the in my other interviews.
And I mean, you already briefly touched upon this now, but do you observe any other differences and commonalities? Yeah, perhaps more differences between visits at different institutions. For example, were there some institutions that were, let's say, more collegial, some others were like more, let's say, trying to grill you in a bit? Or did you observe this kind of differences, or not really?
No, I wouldn't say this really is like, and I didn't see this at the institution level. I think there's definitely variety in the type of people that you talk to and the type of questions they ask. Some really are curious about some aspect of your talk and go into kind of more technical depth type of questions. And others are more curious, you know, where do you see yourself in the next 5 to 10 years? What does success mean to you? And kind of more bigger picture questions. So there's definitely a variety, but I think this variety was present across institutions. I guess the industry interviews are a bit different in terms of the people that you're talking to tend to be really in your area. So the difference in an academic setting, you know, faculty kind of are covering all different aspects of the department. So computer science is a broad field, and there will only be, you know, a certain number of other faculty that are very close to your particular area that you're interviewing for. Whereas at a company or a research lab, there can be quite a few that are kind of in this area and experts in it. So those talks tended to be, you know, a lot more focused on the technical ideas and things related to your actual work, whereas for the academic talks, there was kind of a broader range. You would still talk about your work, of course, but some of the questions you would get could be kind of a bit more coming from different perspectives. So that was interesting.
In general, do you still remember?
Some of the industry interviews actually included a bit of like coding style interviews, but not all. So this was another difference.
I see. Okay, that's interesting. And do you still remember other kinds of questions that you received, perhaps some that surprised you, or like in general, besides the one you already mentioned, for example, how do you see yourself in 5 years?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this was a relatively common one, various variations of it. Yeah. Where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years? What does success look like to you? There's definitely also a common one is like, tell me about your future research direction. So typically in your job talk, you don't really have a lot of time to go into this, but people are very curious about what you plan to do next. Another question is like, how large do you want your group to be? And I think, yeah, there's probably no answer they're exactly expecting here, but I think this question, I think the most important thing is just to make sure you've thought about this beforehand. And it's really kind of testing whether you're, you know, how much you've really imagined yourself in this role, including things like how large of a team or what kind of team do you plan to build up. Mm-hmm. People might also ask, what is your advising style? Another question you might get, it's kind of like, why this institution? So this is, you know, especially if they're thinking, yeah, you'll probably end up deciding between different options. You know, what is it that draws you to this particular institution? How serious are you about coming to that place? And here, I think it's good, of course, good to highlight all the aspects of the institution itself. And it's also fine to mention other things that might influence you to come there, if, for example, for personal reasons and so on. And then other questions you might get are, for me, for example, because I was also considering industry positions, and there is a lot of industry research happening in my area. A common question I got was sort of, why not industry, or what draws you to academia? And then, I think other questions you might get are sort of, what would you like to teach, and things like that, things that might not have been covered in the job talk, for example. And there's various variations also of like, what's your greatest accomplishment? What are you most proud of, as kind of an icebreaker? And then you start talking about that particular aspect of your work.
Okay. And to expand on that, so in general, during the interviewing process, were there any kind of situations that were surprising or that stuck with you, that were in somewhat like memorable?
I think just overall, I was just really happy with how it was just a really cool experience to get to talk to so many people. I just, at the end of the whole process, was like, wow, I feel like I learned so much from just these conversations. I think it broadens your perspective on your own work, but also introduces you to all kinds of things that people are working on. So usually in these one-on-ones, you would spend most of the time, they would be asking you questions. But they actually, one thing I forgot to mention, maybe the most common question I got was, do you have questions for me? And actually I got asked that many, many times, to the point where I was running out of questions. But it was nice actually to have such an opportunity to ask questions. And so sure, some of these can be about the institution, but you can also ask them about their work. And I think in general, it was just a really, really cool experience to get to talk to so many different people, hear so many different perspectives, and have these conversations. So that's something that I sort of didn't think about would be kind of one of the highlights of going through this whole process.
Yeah, and as a last question about interviewing, so after these one-on-one meetings, did you follow up with all or some of the persons, for example, writing them a thank you note or following up on what you have discussed during the interviews?
So I followed up with a few. So I mean, typically at some of these interviews, you talk to on the order of 30 or sometimes more faculty, because you might also have gone to dinner with a group of them. So yeah, you do really meet a lot of people. I did not follow up with everyone. I felt that this would come off probably a bit, well, anyway, I probably, there's different opinions about this, but I can talk about what I did. So in my case, if there was like a conversation that really kind of stuck with me, if there was something that I wanted to follow up on, or someone that I really particularly felt I clicked with and wanted to thank, then I would send a follow up. Or definitely to the person. So usually you have kind of a host, someone who mostly organized your visit, and maybe they're the ones perhaps who introduced you at the job talk or something like that. I would thank them and stay in close touch. And I would just thank a few people that I felt I had conversations that really resonated. But I didn't feel it was necessary to follow up with everyone.
Makes sense. And in terms of deciding, so after receiving the first offer, how did you proceed? Did you, for example, reach out to the other institutions to ask for a quicker decision?
Right. So there's a bit of, timing can be a bit tricky, because not all the interviews are happening exactly at the same time, of course, and therefore the offers as well. But yeah, I think it's so typically what happens after an offer is that you have a chance to go for a second visit. And so you kind of slowly start arranging a second visit. And if there's particular institutions that you would really like to hear back from, I think it's a good idea to let them know just an update from your side that you have received offers and are looking forward to hearing from them. Typically this will send a clear message that they'll, they might ask you what your, if you have deadlines and so on. In general, it's definitely fine to ask for more time to respond to an offer, and people understand. So I think as soon as you know whether you plan to accept or not something, then it's good to let people know. But while you're still deciding and getting information, it's completely okay to ask for an extension. And I think institutions are generally very understanding of this.
In terms of second visits, so what will you typically do there? Also meeting with individual faculty, I guess chat with them about topics other than research, or also still about research. So how did the second visit typically look like?
Yeah, so the second visits, also you meet a lot of people, but it's a little more kind of, I think there's a lot more of the, what questions do you have for me, or how can I help? It's really more catered to whatever it is that you're curious about. And the whole visit is sort of designed to help you make a decision and learn more about the institution. So yeah, I think a lot of the conversations are about sort of what do the current faculty, really appreciate most about being at this institution, or kind of what are some, you can also ask more specific questions about, for example, hiring PhD students, how does this work, or what are the requirements for students, yeah, you can kind of ask more, you get a chance to get even more information for things you might have forgotten to ask or thought, weren't super important until you get to this stage. And also kind of if you have a personal situation where, or where, maybe a two-body problem or so on, you can also bring this up, and typically, the institutions will actually have support to help you navigate that. I think also housing, and yeah, so for example, it could even include a real estate tour or something where you just get a sense of what are the housing options, and learn kind of about the city or the environment that the university is located in. You kind of get to visit the place, really get a feel for what it would be like to live there, what it would be like to work there. You get to meet more colleagues because maybe some were traveling when you had your actual interview, and yeah, it's just a really nice opportunity to get a bigger, fuller picture of the place, ask more questions, and meet more people.
I see.
I definitely think it's useful to go to these.
And how did you eventually converge towards a decision? So what were the relevant decision factors? Were they the same, I guess, as when you applied for positions, right?
Right, yeah, exactly. I think, yeah, I would keep the same answer there.
And what did the startup package include? So I assume, of course, your salary, funding from students, anything beyond that?
So yeah, there's the funding, there's a startup package comes with, so at ETH it comes with 2 of these funded positions for assistant professors, in addition to startup package for kind of, yeah, hitting the ground running, perhaps for equipment or additional funding for students in the beginning. And there's also like a relocation support for, yeah, kind of integrating into the community. So for example, for German classes and so on, and things like that. And also what's been really great is this housing support as well. So having the option to rent temporary housing, so that we don't have to immediately look for housing, things like this. I don't know if I'm forgetting something, but I definitely felt and continue to feel very well supported.
With respect to visa and work permit, like did this also work out without any issues?
This was very smooth. Yeah, this was very smooth. Yeah, I mean, even with the pandemic situation, things were delayed a bit because of COVID for about a month, but all in all, this was very smooth.
Did you directly accept the offer, or did you also try to do some negotiating?
So there is actually a formal negotiation meeting that you have with the president, and so yeah, I did negotiate. I mean, I think my advice for the negotiation side is just to really think about what you need to help you be successful. And clearly an institution that's giving you an offer is also really excited to hire you and wants you to be successful. And so I think there's, yeah, it's good to ask for what you think will help.
Yeah, I guess let's slowly wrap up. And the first question that I had there was like, how did you feel during these different phases? You already mentioned that you were like excited and enthusiastic. Were there, for example, also moments where you felt more exhausted, for example, towards the end of the interviewing season or so? Or yeah.
Right. Sure. Yeah. I think the interviews themselves are at the end of the full day of interview. I definitely remember feeling drained and tired, but I think it's because you've just put in so much energy throughout the entire day and been so engaged with all the conversations. So you're kind of tired in a good way. Yeah, I mean, there's also kind of this waiting period after you've done your interviews and you're sort of curious what will happen. But yeah, I think in general, it's like good to remember that there's, so many factors to these decisions. There's a good amount of randomness in this process. There's a lot of things that are really out of your control. And so easier said than done, but I think it's best to just try to focus on the aspects you can control, how to prepare your application material, prepare your job talk, just see what happens, but know that you'll find a good option somewhere, and not get too caught up in how decisions worked out, because there's so much that you'll never know about how this decision came out to be.
Yeah, great. Any final advice that you can share with future faculty candidates?
Yeah, so I think even like starting early on, thinking about if you know from early on that you're interested in this, or even if you just kind of like to leave the door open, I think it's a good idea to just collaborate widely, get some teaching experience, also just kind of get a bit of sampling of all the different things that the job involves, so that you can be better prepared, but also have a better sense of how much you'll enjoy this. And I think as much as there's this kind of industry versus academia, and that you really need to make a choice, yes, in some ways you do, but there's also kind of ways that you can try to combine these things with having collaborations. Either if you're in industry, there's people who collaborate very closely with academics, or other way they're around if you're in academia and collaborate with industry, or kind of spend sabbaticals or internships, or various ways that you can kind of straddle between and have a bit of benefits from both worlds. But yeah, overall, I think the whole application process, and as much as it is time consuming, it was also really I felt really enriching. Like I felt I learned a lot through it, and in the end, these are connections that you make, and people you see at conferences later, and so on. So all of this is actually really nice and useful.
Okay, then great, Anna. Thanks a lot for all your extremely valuable advice and sharing your experiences. And
thanks a lot for
great,
organizing this. Yeah, I think this is a great initiative.